Tonight, we have a special guest here. She's the co-host of the Propaganda Report and the Drive Time News Hour, right? And she is here with her ex corporate career behind her, having successfully stepped away and has made a mark for herself over the past 10 years plus, I think it's been. Monica Perez. Monica, how are you doing this evening?
I'm great, Richard. How are you?
I am doing wonderfully well. Thank you for asking. We had you on the schedule for the past 2 months. How did your Christmas and New Year's go?
Everything was very good. I went to see my mom, who's old as the hills in New York, and I expected all the old people to be like my mom. She's like, I don't know, God's up in his heaven, and we all got to die. I think I've done my time, to be honest with you. So but I live in LA now. So when this whole COVID thing came down, I would just targeted the old people and I was like, can you believe this? And they were just like, stay away. I was like, oh my gosh, don't you know what's coming? How old are you? Like, it's coming for you one way or another. So it's super fun to see my mom, and I'll miss her when she's gone, but she's not going anytime soon. And she thinks that this is all just another war.
And what do you think? Do you think it's just another war? Do you think it's a special type of war? Do you think it's silent weapons for quiet wars? What are you thinking?
I think it's definitely a war. I think it's World War III for sure. And I know we've talked about this. The report from Iron Mountain makes it very clear that they wanted a substitute for war that worked better than war. And the one thing they thought war really could not do very well was kill sick and old people. It killed young and healthy people, which was like the only thing that could be improved about war as the foundation for society was that. They also talked about how you needed a substitute for war that would both keep people loyal to their national governments, which I was always a little confused about it. I felt like that was for control, but also justify global government by being something that could not be contained by borders. And they had a lot of examples, and they said we're not going to use the one that we think is best. We're not going to tell you about that because we were probably going to use that one, but this was in the 60s. And actually you already saw the kind of suspicious looking flu and COVID stuff, flu and vaccine stuff coming up like as early as the 70s was that 60 Minutes report on the woman who had Guillain-Barré from the swine flu vaccine, and they immediately pulled the vaccine. Like, we just weren't ready for that kind of damage. But I think that it is a war like that, in that you can read about how they ginned up World War I and World War II. You can read how they prolonged the agony, and you can see how society, culture, and the economy all changed from before to after the war in really profound ways. A lot of the old people were still there, but they were irrelevant because they just weren't of the present, of the new present. So like, I'm my mom now, right? I'm a relic. I will be a relic, having remembered Meat Space.
You're bringing up books from the 60s. Oh, geez.
Sorry, I know that's why I have to embrace that. I've been reading.
I'm right there with
decades.
you, kiddo.
Yes,
I know.
I know.
So I think Report from Iron Mountain was published like around 1967, and it was Leonard Lewin who took credit for it as like a satire piece. And he's with Yale, and there's nothing to see there. They don't have an Institute for Human Relations or anything like that. They don't run propaganda operations and these sort of things, or they don't get used by the non-profit foundations and intelligence agencies as a cloak or a condom or prophylactic for their work.
Yale of all places.
I mean, Yale was founded with East India Company opium money from Elihu Yale, and I don't think it ever separated from the milieu from where it started, right?
Yeah,
so that is what it is. So I would I wouldn't offer a report from Iron Mountain as a piece of evidence, but it is a piece of context that I am familiar with. It does go well with a lot of other real pieces of evidence. And it explains
it so well that even if it isn't actually true, it's true in that clearly they think about these things. So the answer when I say to people, well, look at Event 201 or look at the 10 other things that are like Event 201, was like, well, they scenario plan for everything. That's what they do. They spend all their time scenario planning, right? It's bullshit when you dig into the nitty gritty, But okay, so they're constantly scenario planning. This is completely consistent with what they do. And maybe they didn't do it one time with all 15 people in a room talking about restructuring society from the bottom up. But every element of that was very sophisticated. And then who was that big time Harvard economist, big guy who's not like physically, but he was a historian and economist. And he said, I was in on it. So, you can say it wasn't real, but it was effectively real. And Prouty said the same thing. He was like, I don't know if that was real, but that's what they do.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a long history of those sort of things. And then there's other pieces of, like, I don't want to call it evidence. Let's call it artifact. Like Bill Cooper's Behold a Pale Horse. Right. So there's a mixture of, there's some real things going on, but not everything in that book is real. And the whole story doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of questions around those sort of things.
Right.
So the early birds to these types of topics, they go to Barnes and Noble, and that's a book they would carry. Like, they'll carry something, Report from Iron Mountain or Behold a Pale Horse, and people will they'll dig in. Oh, what's being hidden from me? Oh, it doesn't really make any sense. And they bounce off of it. Right. Whereas if you had other books more prominently available that people could get a gleaning of you could have various timelines associated with 9/11. Oh, this is interesting. There's all these contradictions in these timelines are going on, right? How did the insider trading happen? How did Willie Brown, mayor from San Francisco, get a warning? Who warned him? Who warned Dick Gregory? Who warned these people not to fly? Was it Osama bin Laden and Mohammed Atta? Were they making calls like, hey, we like your comedy, we don't want you to fly? No, who's doing these things? And when you get into asking the questions, the story and narrative is much deeper than the cartoonish caricature that the American public buys into, hook, line, and sinker, because they're looking for daddy government to protect them from the bad guys. And if we just go bomb those caves over there and get all that lithium, everything's going to be all right. Or if we just give them some tax dollars to pay off Mother Nature, she'll stop global warming, right? And
the way I think of it,
childish.
The thing that I think is also, like, once the scales fall from your eyes of this, it's also ridiculous to think that what you see is what you get about the power structure in this country. And the way that I always try to make people visualize it, say Warren Buffett gave Obama somehow or another, like, didn't he really supported him in winning the presidency. And I ask people to visualize Warren Buffett sitting at the end of his bed, watching the TV on his dresser, wondering what Obama's going to do next. And I just think that's not how it works. And it also doesn't work that Warren Buffett has a son. I think his son actually worked at Archer Daniels Midland when they had that big scandal or whatever it was. And he kind of escaped unscathed. But they don't.
I have that ADM book around here.
Oh, yeah. Like, it's called the Civil Case, or it's called something like that.
Yeah.
Civic Matter, something like that.
And just for clarification, you're talking about the same Warren Buffett that's in the Franklin cover-up book and named as one of the people.
Oh, was he in that? I read that, but was he in that?
Not the Nick Bryant one,
right,
that's
recent,
the one I
read.
but the John DeCamp, the John DeCamp book.
Original one where the guy, he also knew about Columbine, right? The same guy.
I have it right here.
I think it's towards the end of the book too. Sorry.
Maybe I missed that with the Warren Buffett in that book, and I don't know why it wasn't on my radar. But
there's a Hunter Thompson reference as
Hunter Thompson.
No, can I see the
end.
cover? Is that the black book with the white? Well, maybe mine's black.
Yeah, it's by Senator John DeCamp here. I'll just put it on book camp for you.
The one I read was by a lawyer.
I think John DeCamp.
Franklin Cover-Up. That is the book that I read. For sure. I mean, it kind of had the same.
And let me see if I can get this zoomed in properly. In here, there's definitely Warren Buffett accusations, because right here.
There's a couple of them, yeah. In the sort of center of the book, the
page 148.
Mm-hmm. They talk about
one of Larry King. He was a Republican guy, not the CNN news guy.
No,
one of his earliest boosters
he
was the wife
of
Berkshire Hathaway's Warren Buffett, and then he gets
got it.
Check this out. Buffett favors the multiplication of money, but not people. He contributes to groups advocating radical population reduction. His Warren Buffett Foundation lists hundreds of thousands of dollars in grants to Negative Population Council, the Association for Voluntary Sterilization, Planned Parenthood, the Population Council, and the Population Institute. The Sex Information and Education Council, the negative population growth members, according to the group's literature, quote, believe that a drastic reduction in total population size represents the only viable option consistent with human survival, end quote, right? So he's a eugenicist, depopulations guy, who then is involved in this story, and it's pretty seedy, so I'm not going to read it.
Wow, really?
Right? Oh, yeah.
I mean, that is a seedy story, but I didn't know he had anything to do with that. Wow. So was he one of the people interfering with children in that book, according to that book?
That's how his name gets brought up
Wow.
over
Yeah, I
here.
think he
And
has
here's the
ties
Hunter
to-
Thompson reference right here, the snuff pornography films, and this is named by one of the victims.
Yeah.
And then Offutt Air Force Base, where they were sexually victimized. Offutt is the headquarters of Strategic Air Command. Offutt is also where Bush flew on 9/11. Offutt is also where Warren Buffett was having his last annual golf tournament on the morning of 9/11, and Ann Tatlock, the CEO of Fiduciary Trust, occupant of World Trade Center 2, where the explosion happened. So she's with Buffett when her office blows up. I'm sure this is all just coincidental, and that these accusations made by these victims have nothing to do with Warren Buffett. But
I
he's all
feel
throughout
like
this book.
people like that who get away with that stuff, who are close to the president. And then I want to talk about a little bit about the population thing, but to put a point on that last comment I was making was that this is an intergenerational wealth power
Mhm.
thing. So, I mean, it's perfect kind of Gatto material where these guys are passing on to their children stuff that we don't get to know. Like Warren Buffett isn't sitting there with his son trying to figure out what school he could get into and trying to guess what would be a good fit for you and would you be happy and what's a nice place to live there. And maybe the kid isn't going to get in line, but he can definitely tell the kid what to do, where to go. And if he goes and doesn't like it, he can get him through it and whatever. So and they know. So that's a big difference. And they plan and they know the long game, the very long game. But as far as the population control thing, which is, I think, at the heart of what we're talking about right now, and especially not just the COVID thing, but the whole World Economic Forum thing, and the fact that that little paragraph about Warren Buffett could also apply to Bill Gates. These are the people who are behind the vaccines, the people who are
Buffett
about
groomed Gates. Yes,
population.
absolutely. Yeah.
So if you're, why is their goal so clearly not only population control, but they're also withdrawing fossil fuels? So somebody showed me a graph once of the exponential growth in wealth over the past 100 years or something like that. And the person was trying to convince me that it was because of fiat money. And I said, I don't really know. Like, I don't think so. But first of all, anyone who talks about sustainability should not be happy with that artificial method of growth, and now MMT, whatever. But I said, I look at that and I see oil. I see oil behind that chart, because there's a chart like that when they discovered sperm whales. So
Lamp oil. Yeah.
Yeah. So when they could get the really good sperm whale oil, and it was huge and a lot of it really changed things. And so when I saw that kind of last 100 years, I thought of oil. And now I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal last week about Larry Fink. So he's this finance guy who runs BlackRock. And I think, I think it might be it's like trillions of dollars under management, something like that. It's the largest money manager in the world. And so anybody who wants their company put in his stock funds, and those are the biggest companies in the world, if he says, follow the ESG standards or you don't get financing, they're going to follow the ESG standards. And all they really care about is this carbon reduction, carbon dioxide, whatever. They want to get rid of fossil fuels. But in my mind, the fossil fuels are the source of this great wealth that, maybe I'm wrong, but just let's just say they're the source of the wealth that makes like the miserable existence of a peasant great. Like compared to my ancestors in Ireland, like it's amazing. Just even from my youth, I don't have like mosquito bites. I have air conditioning, it's just like great. And I feel like it's to be able to have this endless source of energy. Except for extraction and transportation, that does cost, but really it's amazing. And they really want to get rid of that. And I feel like it goes hand in hand with the population thing. And I had to ask myself why. And I found myself kind of wondering have you ever heard of Richard Poe? I think his name is I had never heard of him, but somebody sent me an hour-long interview of him. He wrote a book that America is just Britain's bitch, and that we do all their military stuff, but they are still behind the scenes. And if you go back and look at what makes them tick, and if you go back and look at the World War I book, I forget what it's called, but it's by the same guys who did Prolonging the Agony. I think it's called Hidden History, The Secret Origins of World War I.
Oh, you got that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Jerry. I know those guys.
Doherty.
Yeah, Jerry
and-
Doherty.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dockery. Yeah.
Doherty, I think. So those guys, so he said in there was maybe it was Lord Kitchener or something, where he says, I hate the peasants. Like, you can use them as cannon fodder. It would actually be good to have a war just to get rid of them, something like that. And so this Richard Poe is saying, yeah, they really, like, Klaus Schwab wants to walk down the street and not see all those yucky people. And I was actually starting to believe that. Like, I'm starting to think there are too many people who have access to the Maldives. There are too many people who have access to what is actually limited. Growth is not limited, but what is limited is coastline. What is limited is really cool shit to do that not only is kind of empty for you, but it keeps you above it all. Because what is the point of being super rich and elite if there's really no difference? If there's really no, I remember a secretary in my office when I was a banker got like all sorts of insanely expensive IVF, in vitro fertilization. And I remember thinking, wow, like that's like a luxury, like, or, something bad, maybe even, but I thought, wow, like insurance pays for that. And she has that insurance. Like, why am I working literally like 10 times as hard as she is if she's kind of got everything I always really wanted, which was like just a baseline. And it's because that luxury stuff, it costs a lot more, but it's totally unnecessary. And it's actually, and then I got a Honda Accord. I was like, this is fucking fine. Like, I don't need a Mercedes. Like, it's fine. And I feel like that the democratization of like baseline wealth is annoying to those people. And we get on
That's
the beaches
why
and stuff.
they're taking away petroleum. That's the answer.
I honestly think so.
That is the way. I wasn't really in agreement until that last point. And they're like, we need something to differentiate us from them. Their ability to own gas cars in the future will be one of those things, because they're going to make it too expensive for regular people to maintain
cars at all.
And then you're going to have to buy into a cybernetic car that's got 20 million tracking systems and turns off if they don't want you to have electricity, which they can also pretty much monopolize or detect when you're using solar. Hey, you haven't been taken from the grid. What's up? Let's send some people over there.
And look,
So
they're shutting down airlines too. They're
They
shutting
do. So
down
they
air
want,
travel.
look, they don't want to live forever with the rest of us around.
Right.
And as they develop this live forever technology, they're getting rid of everyone else. And it's an old idea. They don't really need to do it because they can just go into their little computer game console and be gone. We'll continue to feed them. We'll like put food in a feeding tube or whatever they need. We'll hook them up.
But they don't want them moving around. Like, that's
but they want to take over the place where we're
cars.
already at, right? Like,
Right.
if you want to take over the metaverse, have at it. But this is Earth and it's controlled by nature, and you're not nature. You're not God. You don't have your brand on me. You don't own me. Fuck off. And more people should
They don't like it.
understand.
They think that they do, and they think that they should, and they think that there's an elite that isn't like a natural elite, like Murray Rothbard would say. They think that there's just an elite and they're chosen, and I think they're willing
Yeah.
to sacrifice their own children, which is what makes,
They
and
do.
you've seen that. Yeah. So that's
Oh,
what
yeah,
makes
100%.
And
it.
they interbreed and do a whole bunch of
Yeah.
stuff to
But this
artificially
does,
facilitate.
it folds in the airline thing. It folds in like, why are they shutting down airlines? Like, I'm very afraid there's going to be some major incident on the airlines, or they're just going to start rerouting it because of 5G. They're really going to,
Bill Gates has like
effing-
7 planes. What do you need a plane for?
Yeah, but they were letting
You don't
us
need to
have that
travel.
for the
They
longest
were.
time.
They were, because they needed us to work and develop the
Right.
technology that they could use to
Build-
take over the
build
world.
it.
But they decided at a certain point, they're like, not only can
Yeah.
we do that, but we also have this virus and we can get the vaccine antidote, whoever we want. And they're
And-
doing the largest wealth redistribution that the
And-
world has ever seen.
Hold on, hold
20th,
on.
20th
So-
century had some pretty good ones.
Let me get this straight. You're talking about people that got rich off of capitalism, then wanting to
Cartel
have people not
capitalism.
participate. Yeah,
I
cartel
don't think it's
capitalism, not
capitalism.
wanting
I
to-
think it's
No, it's
maybe what
crony
they call
capitalism. It's-
financial capitalism. It's like actually the finance game. It's the fiat money game. It's just the increasing the dollar value of stuff that they have at the expense of the wage earner.
when they do the fractional reserve lending thing, it's not so that they get more money. It's so that they get more people working for the same amount of money that they originally
Right.
had in the first place.
Keynes
Because the
said
money
that.
for them is, because they can print
That's
money.
what
Like
sticky
Rothschild has as
wages.
much money as they need to
Right.
do whatever. But what they have to do is get people to want to work for that money and do things they wouldn't ordinarily do for that
But
money.
even the crony
That's how the money
system
gains
allows
power.
But even crony capitalism, which I totally agree with all of what you're saying and totally
Mhm.
on board with the Austrian school and Rothbard and Mises and so forth. But the bigger point is
Parallel in society. That's all I have to say. Rockefeller brought Mises here to America.
Yeah,
like
but
they're
still,
smart. They were onto it. They're like, this guy's, he knows what he's talking about. Let's bring him to America.
Very smart. And of course,
That
then
gets us to
Rothbard sort of
support.
was. Well, it's a funny, that is an interesting history.
So
But
Tony,
no,
what were you saying? Yeah.
Yeah, but the issue here is when we look at like so here are people that are wanting to bring in sort of a conspicuous form of like essentially socialism, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like people who got rich off of forms of crony capitalism now want to bring in a situation. I mean, I heard one of the CEOs of BlackRock and is either BlackRock or Vanguard.
Larry Fink.
So
or
a really
Vanguard.
big guy. It was
Sound
a
like the
really
same
big guy. But it's interesting. It was actually from a John Titus video. So, and it was, I guess the point was he was lamenting democracies, right? And one of the issues of democracies is the fact that like they don't have the type of top-down control over the money supply, especially in the commercial banking system, that they would in the federal systems that exist around the world. And that was like a huge issue. And so he was looking for ways in which to have more granular control over that. And he looked at China and he looked at more, socialistic socialistic economies to be able to have that sort of like example, even though so here people got rich off forms of crony capitalism, still wanting a very conspicuous form of kind of socialism as a way to bring in the sort of like top-down technocratic global control grid that they so desire. And like to your point, Monica, I think it's even more pernicious than that. These people psychologically deem themselves to be sort of gods. Like if you look at like a Brahmin caste in India, for example, it's not as much practiced in their society anymore, but people in the Brahmin caste, for example, the highest caste, if you touch someone of a lower caste, you're then reincarnated in that lower caste. It's a sort of like psychological like disease.
You become
of an
untouchable.
individual. You become
not in the
untouchable.
Cole
And
Elliot
when
Ness
you-
way.
Right. So it's like it's a psychological situation where like they're willing to sacrifice their young so long as they remain at the top of the food chain, so to speak. And that goes along with the transhumanistic goals and the genetic
In-group out-group stuff, which
yes, you got
is
it.
like the
You
source
got
of all evil. But they paid Marx to write the Marx and Engels, I believe, were commissioned by the capitalists because they needed a way to control the wage earner, the producer in the Industrial Revolution. And I think that is where you get the inflation and the fiat money is that they that's what Keynes said. We've got sticky wages. We would just keep lowering their wages, but they're going to figure it out. So we've got to inflate their wages away. And if you look at the 19th century, and it's actually kind of hard to get some of these charts, I'm sure you guys have them all, but I was trying to look at the impact in the 19th century versus the 20th century of like wages, standard of living. And so I just wanted to see what like the price of a quart of milk was. And it was basically flat during the whole, if I recall correctly, during the whole century of the 19th century. And
most of the 19th century, there was no inflation. That's right.
And wages went up because productivity went up and labor captured some of that. And then that completely
economies of scale also.
And so I was just looking at the last 20 years. I call it the dog food index. So when I first got a dog, which was 20 years ago, I think it was a 33-pound bag, but I'm going to say it was a 30-pound bag of dog food was $30. And now that exact same bag, you can Uber, is $60. And wages, the average salary at that time was $30,000, and now it's $54,000. So it should have doubled, but it didn't. It went up by 24,000 instead of 30,000. So that's a lot of dog food, actually. It's like 100 bags of dog food in the 20th year. In the 20th year, I'm getting 100 less bags of dog food a year. Not that I would use 100 bags of dog food, but every year it was however many, like 5 bags of dog food less every single year, cumulative. And that's real. So that's how they keep you from ever accumulating any capital, from ever pulling a Ron Paul. And it's intentional. And I agree. They're not trying to get them more money, but it's the same reason they don't want us flying around anymore. They just, and I think it's the upper middle class. It's like the bourgeois. bourgeoisie, whatever, that they like the least. And I think that's always been the thing, because they are the real threat. They're the ones who consume.
Yes.
They're the ones who are tacky. They're the ones who are on the beach in the
They're the ones who have
Maldives.
families. You know, they
yes, they're the
produce
ones
children,
who can
yeah.
actually educate their children
Correct.
and take care of them. That's why I always like income tax is totally regressive, because rich people, or it's only applied to people who earn money, like only
That's correct.
people
It's
who work.
only owners.
Most productive workers, and they're super ultra taxed, because not only do they have that sliding scale of the percentage, but these are the people, the doctors, lawyers, and stuff, who have to live close to the city, because otherwise they'll never see their kids, because they work so much. They can't send their kids to those schools. They have to send them to the private schools. It's very expensive to live close to the city. So they're just, it's hard to be sympathetic with the people you see as the professional class, but they are the threat, and they are the ones who I think are, that's why they don't want people flying or anything. They just want to cut it off pretty high. And that's why
what
they
creates
don't
the most
insulate
stable
them.
social order is the middle class. So you have to destroy the middle
Yeah.
class. You also have to destroy the family. And let's take your dog food example and scale that to every expense in your household.
Right.
And then all of a sudden that becomes very obvious for individuals how pernicious that is.
And if they defund the police or federalize the police, it'll go just like medicine and education, where it's really
Right.
third worlding it, so that only the ultra elite can afford. I have a friend in England who has 7 kids. Like, he's so unusual. And he said, maybe 6, so he said each kid, I'm still not, like, I asked him 10 times. He said, and it was a while ago, that each kid he pays £70,000 a year to go to private school. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. He said there were like taxes on it or something. I don't know, but he's an investment banker big time. So he was like, could handle it, but not by much.
All
I
to
mean,
be
that's just-
indoctrinated in globalist theory and ideology.
Yeah, well, but it was probably like a religious private school. I don't know what they're
I see, like a
indoctrinating them with,
parochial
but
school.
to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
out of,
Yeah.
to get out of it is, I believe it's penalized.
Wow.
What they're trying to do is end free trade. And since you mentioned Marx and Engels, I wanted to bookend that with Adam Smith. So in this entry in my history blueprint, it reads, and this comes from a Wikipedia article, which I have the references for. A turning point came in 1834. The free trade reformers in England succeeded in ending the monopoly of the British East India Company, leaving trade in the hands of private entrepreneurs. Americans introduced opium from Turkey, which was lower quality but cheaper. Competition drove down the price of opium and increased sales. Concept: Adam Smith worked on behalf of the British East India Company, who used opium to undermine and control subjugate populations. When Smith wrote about agriculture, he wasn't talking about rice, corn, nor green beans, right? So if up to the old China trade, that which existed under the East India Company, this is the same multi-generational grouping that is part of this inclusive capitalism great reset.
Have I
So-
told you?
Yeah. Okay.
So inclusive capitalism in 2014 by Rothschild and Company, there's a Guardian article here. Inclusive capitalism initiative is a financial Trojan horse to quell a coming global revolt. They knew they were on the ropes, and then COVID happened, and then the Pope's like, hey, inclusive capitalism, everybody. But it's just part of their Cloward and Piven strategy of crushing free trade and ending freedom along with it.
Well, I think it's funny that they call it the Great Reset, because if you think of anything that you ever reset, what are you doing? You're just zeroing out all the registers.
But it's so crazy to talk about a great reset and COVID-19 in the same sentence, Monica. You're a crazy conspiracy theorist who must be literate to say these two things in the same sentence, because nothing out there verifies or brings any type of merit to your argument in this case. There's no substantial or relevant reading to be done on these things. I can just say conspiracy theorists like Crystal Ball on Breaking Points and say there's nothing to see here, everybody. That's gaslighting, if I'm correct. Have you read this book?
I haven't. I actually had the second industrial revolution
that one.
or the fourth industrial revolution on my shelf. I
that
remember
one.
discovering it. Exactly. No, I think
got
that's the
one.
one I have. Yes.
I got a bunch of bigger ones here, but
That's where they say if you stop the spraying, the chemtrails, it's going to get really hot. And like last summer was crazy hot. But I wanted to make one point about your opium wars with China. I don't know if we talked about this, but I think that this is a mercantilist opium war type approach with the vaccines. Like that's what's happening to Africa. It's like, you're not taking the
Correct, yeah.
vaccines. We are going to be shooting cannons at your coastline until you
And your immune
accept the
system.
vaccine. Yes. Your metaphorical coastline.
Yeah. Yeah. The part where you meet the rest of the world. This Klaus Schwab character, I said it earlier today to the students in a Q&A session, but I'll say it again for you guys because you're special too. Yeah, I always point out Klaus Schwab wrote in here that he wants implant that, you know, and in the appendix, it says deep shift and implantable technologies are coming to your head sometime soon by 2025. And Klaus is a bad guy. But when Elon Musk says, I'm making the brain chips for you, he's a good guy. And you have to remember to keep these good guys and bad guys apart, everybody.
And he was literally created by government subsidies. And I think that about Soros too. Do you know how Soros supposedly made his money? How he did actually make his money?
I do. Can I give you my version of the answer? Because I did not know. But I asked Jeff Steinberg, who is co-author of this book, Dope Inc.
Nice.
And I have a couple of things highlighted in this book, as you can see, that are relevant. And I asked Jeff Steinberg, I said, hey, what's the origins of Soros? What's his rise to power? And Jeff Steinberg told me, well, that was the Swiss Rothschilds. And I was like, bullshit, because I'm writing a book on the Rothschilds. And if there were Swiss Rothschilds, I would know about this, Jeff. And then I came home incredulous. I looked it up because he said, one of the French Rothschilds moved to Switzerland and then they opened a branch there basically. And it's the Edmond de Rothschild Bank. And he did help to fund Soros's start, and all these other things that he told me that I was incredulous of were true, but only upon me going and looking for myself can I understand what he's saying, right? So because I did the work, I got the benefit of asking those questions and seeing where his early beginnings, aside from him working for the Nazis
when he's
in
14.
that 60 Minutes interview that is highly inconvenient to their narrative. But the other thing that concerns me is he put $20 billion into his foundations to promote democracy. And we all see what he does around the world. He promotes chaos.
Maybe the same thing sometimes.
Two wolves and a chicken voting on what's for dinner is not chaos. How can you say such things? We live in a constitutional republic, and the Republicans were the anti-slavery party. They were the abolitionist party supporting a republic. Democrats wanted democracy, and we're not a democracy. This is not ancient Greece. So
no, that's undermines the foundational documents. But I have a couple of comments about Soros. If
please,
I know you move fast, so I'll squeeze them in. I believe that so he was in the London School of Economics, and I think he was a student of Karl Popper and his open society thing, where tribalism needs to be overcome, right? And I, as a total melting pot kid, was not aware of tribalism. I don't have any tribe or even barely any culture. But and he said that he wanted to make a lot of money so that he could institute or implement Popper's ideas. And how did he make that money? Well, everybody says, and I think it's true, that he basically made the money by front running the Bank of England with his, wave theory. And I thought, it took me a long time to have this thought. I was like, maybe they just told him what was going to happen. And when you see that whole LIBOR scandal, like there is a lot of insider trading. And that Larry Fink article in the Wall Street Journal from last week, he was in the meeting in 2008 and he was in the meeting in 2020 saying what the Fed was going to do. These are people who are in private practice getting the inside scoop ahead of time, and they're getting a pass because it's an emergency. And I just assume that Soros was given all you need is a tip off. And then he goes and implements the Popper stuff. And then I have one more thing after that. Yes, exactly. Reading the mind of the market. I don't believe he did that.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible to do that.
All right. So that's his book, Alchemy of Finance. And then I was bringing him up in the history blueprint. And where's Karl Popper? Right here. Karl Popper. And I have the document down here someplace. I'd have to search.
The LSE thing. So I also want to point out something about his 14-year-old self. So he supposedly worked for he in his own admission worked for the Nazis when he was 14. James Comey was, when he was 17, he misidentified the Ramsey rapist, and the guy who he put in jail, they had to pay millions of dollars for false arrest because Comey, as a 17-year-old, went to the mat calling this guy out. And I feel like Fidel Castro wrote a letter to FDR when he was 12 saying, I'll do anything for you. And AOC, Stacey Abrams, these people were Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Lady Gaga, all went to this Johns Hopkins Center for Talented Youth as teenagers.
Yes,
I think they identified.
I knew about
these
that.
people.
I knew about Brandon Zuckerberg going there.
And the guy who did Quora.
Yeah.
So I knew.
Yeah, I knew.
Gaga.
I was like, that's interesting. That
and it wasn't a school
together
for talented youth. It was a school that studied talented youth. They were the subjects. It was a study. And you had to get like a 1200 on your SATs in 7th grade. But so these are the people who I consider to be created persons. I coined that phrase. And a lot of times they're identified as teenagers for, I think, maybe that's what a lot of this testing is for and stuff, to find whatever, sociopaths or I don't know what, geniuses, people with good memories. I don't know what. Like, I think that's the thing with Zuckerberg.
Yeah, they're always looking for the next Goodwill Hunting. So they can subvert them, and then they're always looking for the next Zuckerberg, so they can have a front man.
But Zuckerberg
malleable.
Was a classics major, and then transferred to Exeter as a junior. And I feel like classics major, the CIA looks for people like that because they have good memories. Because I saw him in Congress recently, and I was like, that guy, he just has a good, and not just, but he has quite a good memory, and that would be enough, actually.
Well, what movie is it? There was a movie or a series where they used James Joyce's Odysseus book. Well, not Odysseus. I'm trying to think.
Finnegan Drake. I mean,
No,
that's a pretty out there book.
I thought it was Odysseus.
Ulysses?
Portrait of
Ulysses.
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 Same
And it was like
Same
a
guy.
Cold War, MI6, communist spies type of movie. But that tells them that that person probably has the ability to read long, mundane passages looking for key points of information and bringing the story back to a summary. I mean, the Greek classics have a lot of lessons that are taught throughout it, but
a lot of perennial
as far as
philosophy
like
and questions asked them. And when you look at the classical literature, the reason why the Freemasons support the classical education, the 7 liberal arts, is because it produces a freeing mind, one that can use logic and reason and approach things critically, be able to integrate many different points of information from many different subjects that seem to be disconnected. And there's a large goal as to why they support those. Yeah, it's something I teach
that's what
in the
they
background.
said about the people who were involved in the report from Iron Mountain. Okay, let's say it was not real, but basically based on how they really do it, is they would only include people who were exceptional in more than one field.
You got it.
So that's why it was John Kenneth Galbraith was the guy who said that he was asked to join and was unable to do so.
And you said it's 1,200.
Galbraith, was he a Rhodes Scholar though?
Yes, 1,200 on the SAT in 7th grade.
Yeah, because that's IQ based.
I was asking if Galbraith was a Rhodes Scholar. I thought he was
I don't know, but he was definitely part of they were asking him to be included in that.
This is the preeminent book, Cloak and Gown, Scholars in America's Secret War. This is how intelligence, MI6 and CIA use universities to recruit.
Wow, what year was that written? Hopefully pre 9/11, because
1987.
Actually,
the same exact year as Alchemy of Finance by George Soros.
But there were a few turning points, I think, in media control, and 9/11 was a big one. 2018 was a big one. The Parkland thing. Obviously JFK was a big one. So
yeah, really the story of how they infiltrated our university system is to know the who's who of the intelligence agencies and their history. And X2
Kennedy.
X2 is the American contingent to the Anglo-American double cross, or XX. So they call it X2 in America. Angleton was the British agent who controlled American intelligence and was the mole for the Mossad.
He was
he went to Yale.
Counter espionage.
Not Yale. He went to Yale and then Oxford. He got anglicized. Angleton did.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious.
And he was known as the Oracle. Actually, that's interesting because James Hesus Angleton was known as the Oracle, and Oracle Corporation, the database, was a Pentagon project to help the CIA preserve Angleton's information in electronic format. It was being developed back then. But I recall seeing over here, right here on this page, in this Franklin cover-up book, there's another oracle we talked about earlier, the Oracle of Omaha, Buffett.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's right.
maybe that's more telling. But yeah, Jesus Angleton, the oracle here, that situation of Cold War skullduggery, and duplicitous agents, and like how the British got us into World War II, all those types of operations, he took over. His dad was a lawyer in Italy working with Roberto Calvi. I mean, it's a really
the Vatican banker.
Yeah, there in Sindona, there was a whole bunch of interesting connections, but it really gets into the underworld aspect of the Americans. There's a certain group of Americans, let's call them Anglophiles, and the British never got out of the opium trade, never got out of the drug trade, never got out of the arms trade, and making war on other countries and subverting and sitting back and reaping. Right. And so to understand the trend from their idea to how did they actually get it done, you have to see this as how they communized all the university systems, because it happened top down in this country. It wasn't grassroots, like people support communism and they rose the power in the universities. Yeah, it didn't happen like that.
You might be interested in this. The Students for Democracy, that whole thing where they were CIA fronts and Gloria Steinem and everything worked for them. The two of the guys in the Global Business Network, which were the ones who did the scenario planning in the 2010 Rockefeller Foundation document, and then were Peter Schwartz, Ogilvy, and Stuart Brand, who were all the Esalen Institute. Peter Schwartz was at the Stanford Research Institute, which is what Siri. I didn't know
Ogilvy
that
was a British agent.
Stanford Research Institute.
David Ogilvy was a British spy, advertising magnate.
What
he worked
year?
with what do you mean? What year? Was he a spy?
The recent guy? Yeah, because I think maybe there's a father and a son.
Grandfather, probably.
Yeah.
David Ogilvy was the father of advertising for many people. So his son.
Then the 2017 SPARS document so the 2010 Rockefeller Foundation document had 4 scenarios. The SPARS document is one of those scenarios, and it's this scenario. And it was written by Ogilvy and Schwartz, who were Global Business Network guys. But those guys, Schwartz and Stuart Brand and stuff, were way back into that, Students for Democracy and everything. And in the documents that Rockefeller Foundation, Johns Hopkins, who put out that 2017 SPARS document, they don't get into the backstories of these guys. And when you even look at their wiki page, they don't say that this stuff is a front for the CIA or that Stanford Research Institute is an arm of the defense, the Department of Defense.
Or that Stuart Brand had a famous pen pal who studied bounded harmonic functions.
Who was that?
Ted Kaczynski. It's a Goodwill Hunting callback that I just did to you.
Yes.
Because I said Goodwill Hunting earlier.
I didn't know that Goodwill Hunting was Ted Kaczynski.
No. In Goodwill Hunting, Robin Williams is having this conversation and he says, hey, who is Ted Kaczynski? And the bartender says, the Unabomber. Right. And then the other mathematician who specialized in his area, but is clueless about the rest of the world. That's Murray Gell-Mann syndrome. Right. He's like, you don't even know. Like, first off, Ted Kaczynski was a member, not a member, but a subject of MK Ultra, CIA, Rockefeller Foundation, uninformed, unethical experimentation on people.
The youngest student at Harvard at the time. So they really took a vulnerable person.
They took a wunderkind and they blew his mind. And then
he made the point.
Put him in a cage.
Kaczynski, earlier, we were talking about something that reminded me of a Kaczynski point, which is when Tony was saying about these scientists don't, or you were talking about the Wuhan stuff, they don't really take into consideration the risk they're exposing other people to. Kaczynski made the point that what they do is they evaluate what they're doing on a risk reward basis for themselves personally. So they think I could get a Nobel Prize and there's a 1 in a million chance that I could die, but I'd rather take that chance because there's a 1 in 10 chance I'm going to get a Nobel Prize. And then they aren't he doesn't make this point, but I make this point. They aren't such good decision makers that they actually end up with all the money to take those chances. They're taking the money from us and we're not allowed to make that same calculus. Is this going to be worthwhile to me personally? And what is the risk to me personally before I give you my 1 millionth of the money you need because you're going to come and hold a gun to my head if I don't? And then we are in a much greater risk because they do not take into account the risk it's a problem with collective action, especially forced collective action or proxy, collective action by proxy.
Correct. Yeah, it's an issue of ethics also as well. I mean, it's an ethical question that isn't being sort of talked about. And to bring it back to economics, there's also a question of incentives. You know, people respond to incentives. What incentive structures are set up right now? You have to compete, for example, with the federal
Donuts and lap
government
dances,
in order to
get your shot.
in order to get grants, right? Now, and donuts and lap dances for sure. If you're in you know, in Denmark or somewhere, you have the red light district, they have a vaccination
Vegas.
shop set up right next to it now, saying, look, you have free
So
free sex
regressive.
for a half hour. Yeah, right.
So regressive.
It's pretty much the downfall of
Vice,
civilization, but incentive
pushing vice on the
structures.
poor.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Pushing vice on the poor. We're back to an ethical question, and they don't have that as part of their purview. It's not also just talking and bringing it back to economics, the idea of incentives. You have to compete for government grants. And so in order to be even do your science, you have to make essentially, there's no private, I guess you could get into the private sector and become maybe an engineer, research developer. That's also partly
because
government, especially because the corporate
academia
subsidies from government corporations.
Gets the research and then subsidizes that. So see, that's the thing. That's why this stuff wouldn't exist. And if you trace almost anything back, you'll find a government grant, often a Department of Defense grant, like driverless cars or
an NIH grant. I mean, it goes back to a couple places where the people with the stolen money divvied it out to get more stolen money. It's kind of the way.
But it's not just to get more stolen money. They are working for people that they don't realize aren't even in it for the money.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
There's a bigger, because these people they're mad scientists. They'll do anything in order to have a justification to attempt the research they want to attempt, like Fauci or Francis Collins or Peter Daszak or Ralph Baric or Xi Jinping, so forth and so on.
And it's really just petty egomania, really.
Correct. Yeah. That's right. Oh,
pride
the petty
grows
egomania.
on the human heart like lard on a pig.
We talked about. I
just
wanted to bring this back a little bit. So that's a good point. That's
Gulag is right here in this book.
Form young global leaders. You know, if you look at many of the people in positions of power today, they started with the World Economic Forum's Young Leadership Program. You also have this. It was brought to me by a member of the GTW community, the Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative. They're taking like small city mayors and they're educating them on progressive politics.
Oh yeah.
And so if we think we're going to avoid this just in rural communities as well, we are so far because of the temperament of individuals that make up rural communities. But let's be honest here, they're also re-educating these individuals in order to promote sort of progressive politics. So
that's why they
want extremely careful.
The rural internet, and those mayoral organizations are international, by the way, and so are the policing ones.
I have a question for the class. Do those people in that picture, do they not leverage or use freedom in their lives? Because I would expect if you try to take it away from other people, people might resist at some point. Just saying. And you know, if they go around turning off people's freedom and someone goes and turns off their freedom, they shouldn't freak out, right? Because they're doing it to other people. There's causality. Like the world exists. I am conscious of it. Causality exists, and therefore I take myself and my actions seriously. These other people seem to not get those first couple parts, and they're like, oh, we can just control you. And I'm confused about how that works without violence, because that's intellectual bankruptcy. And if you're intellectually bankrupt and you have to threaten me with violence, what option do you want me to explore right now? What do you think I'm going to do?
I think
I'm not going to give you what you want. I'm definitely not going to give you what you're expecting. I 100% am patient.
I think that bureaucracy insulates them from reality. I had an experience.
Amtssprache, official language, bureaucratese. Keep going. I like it.
I went just as a feeling that I got. I never was politically active really at all. And my mother used to take me down for the March to Life on January 22nd.
You weren't politically active, but you were certainly radio active.
I was, but that was after. That was around the time. So whenever it was that the Obamacare thing was coming down, I just felt like economically, once healthcare was a government thing, you could never, in a democracy, you could never get 50% or more of the people to vote for smaller government once the economy was more than 50% government. So they're just never going to vote for less control. And then you have like conservatives, the way the English have conservatives, which is like, we can just do this more efficiently. So I thought.
And how's their healthcare? Do we get healthcare like them? Because my question is, if I'm paying the doctor works for me. If the government pays the doctor work for government. Government might want to get rid of me. Doctor might euthanize and give us all carousel like they do in Logan's Run.
That is what I think, that the government health care is for population control and not for health. But so I decided I had to go march on Washington. I wasn't going to, how could I look my kids in the eye if I let this go down without a fight? So every time there was a march on Washington, I went. And it was really funny because I was there with my Ron Paul stuff and people were not loving me until like the end when it got really just ugly. Then they were pushing me to the front, like, read her sign. Because I was like, give me liberty, not dead. Or so I don't know. It was Ron Paul stuff. And in the beginning, they didn't like it. But everybody there, it was so hilarious. I don't know, it was at least tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds. And I mean, I think like every single person had basically a sweatshirt with the American flag on it and like a fanny pack with the American flag on it. And it was just very kind of what I think of as flyover country. And I, you know, not blow my own horn, but like I went to Harvard and Stanford and I'm from New York and, you know, I lived in LA and I understood what the people were thinking, the little, punky aides or lawyers or whatever on the subway and their little suits. And there's some chick who just really looked like it was offensive to her to be on this train with me. And I was just with all of us because it's kind of crowded. And I said it to her, I was like, oh, I'm sure this is your, you know, worst nightmare, all like flyover country people. And I wasn't giving her a hard time. I was just trying to sympathize. Like I understood that she just like couldn't fucking get her mind around it. And she just, the fact that I was talking to her made her want to puke. And she just like turned around and was just like, ugh. And I'm thinking, there, but for, you know, you're only there because of us and our money. Like that's what you think of us. Like I couldn't even, I was speaking to normally, I was actually trying to empathize with you, connect with you and joke about how fucking ridiculous it was that everybody here was wearing an American flag. And she wanted to puke. And that's what they think of us. So she isn't thinking I'm scared of these people. She's thinking these people are so fucking stupid. There is no way that they could ever get the better of me and the people I work for.
Well said. And there's something very disturbing about that because that's a feeling of disgust. And when you have feelings of disgust, you're not necessarily fearful of those individuals. You can actually commit greater crimes against them because that's something to be exterminated, pushed away, marginalized in society in some capacity. That's something Peterson talks about, the difference between being scared of something and being disgusted by something, two very key different emotions. And when you're disgusted by something, that's when you create genocide.
You don't have the gene therapy, you're dirty. Yeah, you're or dirty. Some people might think if you have the gene therapy, you're dirty. Like, where's the argument begin and end with that? Right? Maybe we shouldn't dehumanize each other and look at the common opposition.
No, that's what they have to do. They have to keep us constantly fighting against one another in order to perpetuate
over stupid stuff because there's nothing sensible to really argue about other than being subjugated by a bunch of multi-generational gangsters, interest-specific kleptoparasites.
Monica, what inspired you to get involved in the podcast world? And like, I'm curious, just for our listeners out there right now, we haven't really asked that question, but
what made you think you could do a radio show, lady?
Right.
I didn't mean to. I was trying to I was taking this exam. So I had a bunch of little kids and I knew I don't know. I guess I kind of got ruined. It's like what a coworker of mine once said, like the most sexist thing ever. He was joking around, but he's like, educating a woman is like pouring water in a shoe. Either the water runs out or you ruin the shoe. And I was like, okay, whatever. I'm sure that's bad. But what actually happened is what I really wanted in my life is to have kids. And then I was so myself indoctrinated with the idea that it was like work without worth to cook and clean and take care of your kids and really focus on that. It seems like an afterthought that you could outsource. That's really how, I went to school till I was 30.
So you should just be a lawyer or a CEO. That's what you had carved up. You had your Juris Doctorate and you got your MBA and no kids in that picture at all from that educational standpoint. You're supposed to be corporate woman and you'll be CEO or take over the firm one day.
I only did all that because my mother had 9 kids and it set up a dynamic in the home where she could absolutely not leave. She had no financial independence. They didn't have enough money. And she wasn't necessarily, I love both my parents, but she wasn't really treated very well because she had no standing. And I was like, I'm going to hedge my bets. I'm going to go to school and I'm either going to be able to support myself or I'm going to find somebody who is willing to have an absolute arm's length transaction here where I am going to sacrifice my revenue stream to bring that kind of quality into raising your kids. And I found that, but I did find for myself that like I felt like it wasn't enough. It wasn't good enough. And I really regret it. And I absolutely throw myself into it now and have for some years, but like just it was a long time that I just didn't understand what was really important. I'm like, it's always been the same. They kill the antelope, you clean the cave. Like it's the fucking same. Somebody has to do one or the other. And it just helps when you can actually feed the baby with your body that you're the one who stays home. Like it's just not that complicated. So I'm just being facetious. There's a lot of really valuable things to do with the world. And I'm open to anybody doing anything they want, basically, with the exception of unethical things.
No, but you bring up a good point though. It's like, it's a full-time job to be a parent, whether the man stays home with the
more
woman,
than a full-time job.
It's more than a full-time job.
Yeah, it's more than I can handle.
And the idea of bulk economy comes from, the first specialization of labor.
Well, Tony, they doubled their taxes with getting women in the workforce. Then Gloria Steinem and the CIA.
And it disconnects the kids from the culture.
Yes.
So I thought something I could do to kind of prepare myself for going back to work, which shouldn't have been my priority, was to take these CFA exams, this chartered financial analyst, so I could like go work in a hedge fund or something. I thought if I were old, I probably am not going to become an investment banker again, but I could probably get away with being a manager of money. So my mind was on fire. And I was just always thinking, and I stumbled upon, because they're really hard tests and they're very stimulating. And I stumbled upon Hans Hermann Hoppe at that time. And it's kind of an adjuvant. Like my mind was so fast that when Hoppe landed in it, it just freaking sprouted. And
for those who aren't familiar, he's an Austrian school economist and theorist, and he's more, he's sort of in the light of sort of a Rothbard, but I think he's still around these days.
For sure.
He's much
he's an anarchist, and I love him, and he's an anarchist first, but he's like, if you can't have anarchy, monarchy. And I was like, oh my gosh, I thought of that. It's like that's what I was thinking. So anyway, so I was so on fire, and then in all of this, and I immediately I had already given up on limited government as a as a utopian fantasy. And I was kind of depressed about that. But when I realized that he was saying like Hayek's thing where a society is self-ordering, then I was like, oh, wow, like the government's just a mistake. It's just a mistake. Like you don't need it. And at this
it's self-ordering based on market principles, basically.
It's self-ordering. It's based on if
human action.
Yeah, human action is is more productive when it's creative, not destructive. So if this is just me talking, but
when it's not forced, when it's voluntary, not forced too.
And it's not, marauding mobs are never going to be able to create the kind of wealth that a creative, diligent person or community is going to. So as a creative, diligent person, I think you are going to be able to defend your borders against the marauding mobs, and you're going to cooperate because inside those walls, it's better. It's more prosperous. It's cleaner. It's all of that. And so some guy builds a store and another guy builds a house. Who's going to build the road? Like the guy who owns the store or the house, they're going to get together and they're going to build the road. And how are you going to get around without getting robbed? Like you're going to just, give somebody a couple of bucks to walk with you, like the Knights Templar. Like that's what they did. And they took, so society is self-ordering, but I had all these thoughts that were really a mile an hour or a million miles an hour. And I was at a wedding, and basically the only other English speaker at the wedding was a radio producer. So she just loved my ideas. And when she brought me into the station to meet the program director, like they thought I was just totally off the wall. Like they thought, I think maybe I was like a novelty act. And they just thought it was so hilariously cute that I was a woman. And I just thought it was so funny. And actually he had used to work with Art Bell. So he liked these kind of, wacky ideas. And he loved me, and he immediately gave me an on-air audition. And then I had a show Saturday nights. Like the very best was like when I did midnights on Saturday, but then I kind of moved up the ladder. And then I just had an afternoon show. I don't know, it was 3 hours. It was long, 12 to 3, something like that, 3 to 6. every Saturday for years. And that's how it was WSB, which is a big radio station. And that's how they groomed their weekday guys. And I was willing to like keep the back seat. I didn't want a big show because I have kids. And it was a perfect thing. I was like, I could just do this for 10 years and maybe at the end I get a real job. But then 8.5 years in was last year's 2020. And Apollo, run by a friend of Jeffrey Epstein's, bought the station from Cox, which was a family company. And
Also a questionable name.
Yeah. I wouldn't defend them normally because it's big media thing, but I got taken off the air the day that they stopped owning the station. So it wasn't an improvement. It was anyway. And my program director retired, and it just happened to be
Is
the
that
day.
Cox Communications?
It's Cox Media. It's not
media.
Cox
It's a whole
Communications.
different. I was going to say it's
Yeah.
a larger conglomerate. Okay.
Yeah. So my co-host on my podcast, Finkley, was my producer at WSB, and he's like, that last show of yours, you literally hit like 9/11, Epstein, Event 201, Boston Marathon bombing. Like there was something my new executive producer was just like, oh, just bring it. Don't worry. I was like, I don't know. It's like, no, say whatever you want. It's like, I don't know about that. Anyway, so I don't know what brought me down, but we had kind of thought something like that was going to come because we knew the company was getting sold, and we started doing the podcast a couple of months before that, and it was a pretty easy segue because they were training me anyway to be like have a daily show. So I had spent all these years just kind of listening to them about formatics and how to deliver stuff and really how to generate calls, which was a really great skill to have and a really nice thing to like talk to people who people from all walks of life were listening for traffic, and you'd piss them off and they would call, and then it was really great. It's really good. And you could reach people who weren't looking for you, who kind of were pissed off that you were on their radio station. And then you could really make a difference because you could reach people who really had never heard any of this stuff before. So it was really too bad, but it was very stressful. So I like this a lot better.
And how has it become more relaxing and in stride for you, being in total control of all your production and time and schedule? And
it's great. And actually that's one of the things about Kaczynski. He sure had that power principle, right? Like autonomy is one of the 4 elements of the power principle. And I had said from the beginning, I was like, the only reason I can go on with this job for all these years is because I don't have to answer to anybody.
that's pretty much it. That's it. That's what people are looking for. But what did you have to do for yourself as far as, you mentioned the degrees, you mentioned the struggle, you mentioned like the false start, like on radio, because you can't really get to where you want to go on that path. You had to get on that path, and you're over here now. Now, what do you do? And you make your own show. What are the like limitations and obstacles you're seeing in front of you now?
Well, first of all, I don't think I've ever quit anything in my life. Like I just don't quit. My motto is like, you'll have to carry me out on a stretcher. Like that's my motto.
Or disqualify me. Yeah.
Hey, yes. So, but the obstacles I see now are I don't know if it's time management. I have a lot to do. And I feel like I could spend an infinite amount of time, taking care of my kids in my home, and I could spend an infinite amount of time doing the podcast. So I just there's no way to reconcile that, but I could probably get a little more efficient in either of those.
Yeah. Well, it's a day by day work in progress. You figure out a little bit better on how to expose yourself to the information you need to make decisions for your kids or for your business. And then just stick in those 2 realms, because there's a lot of other distraction stuff. Oh, do I need to worry about the mu variant or whatever the new variant is? But they skipped over new, actually, the NU one.
Yeah. And G.
Right.
NG,
Yeah.
of course,
That was
yeah.
highly inconvenient to the lab release theory of Dazax. So they're like, let's skip over
So they
that.
went with the Omicron.
Yeah.
I'm always
Yeah.
like, Omicron, the kids are sick. Oh my God.
And then they're gonna make everybody Omega men at the end.
Oh
of it.
yeah. Oh,
Don't worry,
God.
they're going to use constellation names when they run out of the Greek alphabet.
Yeah. Cassiopeia is coming up next. It looks like a big W.
Did
of
I tell you
jabs on
about-
your arms.
how they changed the nomenclature for that like last May to make it really confusing but sound way more ominous, because there are 4 kinds of coronavirus: alpha, beta, gamma, delta, but all of these coronavirus are beta coronavirus. Beta coronavirus are the ones that human beings get, and they used to just have numerical codes underneath, and I think in the beginning they wanted it to seem like one of the worst the scarier ones that were part of animal illness.
Well, they're like, we could use the name SARS. That's scary. MERS, no, that's a scary virus. 38% of people die, but no one knows what it is, so they're not scared of it yet. So let's keep SARS-CoV-2. Is that good? All right, let's roll it out. Yeah, if you follow their paper trails, there were decisions being made on this thing before the American people knew anything on this, and that shows inside job at the very least. Made it happen on purpose. Let it happen on purpose. Have at it. But it's not accidental, and that means it's on purpose in some way, shape, or form. And people should act as if. Protect your immune system.
I was on Slow News Day this morning, and they showed me that Milliken clip from October 29th, 2019, which you guys were talking about as I entered, and that Rick Bright and Fauci were saying that the flu is it's tainted. We got to have something else, because I always wondered why they didn't go with the flu, why they went with a coronavirus instead, and they explain it there. But that Rick Bright, I was telling these guys, got stepped down because he for a few reasons, but one was that he said that Merc pill was so dangerous that little mouse babies or whatever were born missing pieces of their skulls. So I would just caution people to read Rick Bright's statements about that Merc pill.
And if
he didn't know he wasn't supposed to say anything about that.
That class of pills. Yeah. Maybe he thought he was doing them a favor to push people to the vaccine.
Right. That's right there. Yeah. That's true. From my understanding, it's a protease inhibitor too, which is similar mechanism of action to ivermectin. Protease inhibitor is essentially protease enzyme essentially breaks down the protein in order to combine to the receptor binding domain. So it's like inhibit that enzyme. Receptor. Correct. Yeah, you got it. And so, and it's interesting because they chose the method.
Yes, you have to.
We had to.
I was like, I'm sitting here listening. I'm like, I can't believe I don't know that.
Well, it's the protease inhibitor.
I read a lot about this stuff.
I thank Peter McCullough for that, because he's the one who did a lot of that information. But he mentioned there's one mechanism of action with the new Merck drug. I think Pfizer has one as well coming out, which is it's a protease inhibitor similar to ivermectin. Ivermectin has 3 different points on which it works. There or 3 different mechanisms of action, whereas this Merck pill and this Pfizer pill coming out have one mechanism of action very similar to the protease enzyme inhibitor. And but he said he was worried about the safety profile. Where ivermectin, we know about the safety profile. It's been around now for well over a couple of decades now. Won a Nobel Prize for use in humans, not only in animals, but actually in humans. And we know about its toxicology, its safety, and it's been used effectively. It's been prescribed over 1 billion times for human use. And so, here we're coming out with another emergency use authorization medication in a pill form that has a similar mechanism of action, but has a very sketchy safety profile, because they're trying to rush it through and make it work in some sort of patented fashion by which they can then charge 40 times the amount of what it costs to produce the drug. It's just them.
They're learning from that EpiPen guy. They're like, that guy's model. Let's kick ass. Let's do that.
It's all about what's been out there long enough. Like, that is how you know that the safety profile, because if something affects 1 in a million people and you give it to 7 billion people, that's what is it, like 7,000? How many would that be? So it's 1,000 million. So it's like 7 million people.
They could have used HCQ and ivermectin as off-label uses, and that would have been absolutely routine, except for these companies saying, no, if you do that, we can't get our vaccine out there. So
we can't get the EUA associated.
Yeah, they needed the EUA in order to do the rest of all this stuff. And they lied to get the EUA. They lied and people died. Now, it's not that complicated.
But those trials are nothing compared to when something's out in the population.
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think hydroxychloroquine's been around since the 70s. I'm pretty sure. So they have a long track record on that as well.
But
these new things, they're trendy. They're more popular. They're mandated. Got to take it. Take it.
They're big money. And what's hilarious is that the little communists, the little bougie commies running around with their TikTok politics don't understand. Like, they shame each other for not being vaccinated. I'm like, are you a communist or are you pro? Like, are you a fascist? Like, you got
Next on TikTok Gulag Rock, we're going to learn more about these people who are anti-vaxxers. Hey, is it me or does the Freedom Tower look like a big syringe? Is it just coming clear to me?
Oh my
or is that
gosh.
like
Oh my gosh.
they took us from the two towers and gave us the big syringe?
I think I had a
A
funny,
shard too, I guess.
a very disappointing Twitter feed where they showed it was a German rancher took a bunch of sheep and made it in the form of a needle. I don't know.
Oh, I did see that. I did see that. Yeah,
I have it.
yeah.
I'm trying
No,
to
I think
find
it wasn't
while I'm
German. I thought it
talking
was
in a minute.
Irish.
Thought it
I
was
thought it
in
was an
Germany,
Irish
or maybe it's Irish.
advertisement where they used sheep to represent the people getting vaccinated. I was like, is that intentional? Because that's funny as shit right there. Don't know if they
Right.
got it or if they got one over on the people that were paying them for the ad.
Oh, here it is. Sheep. It says German here on the New York Post. So it's sheep, goats, join. Let me just put this on here. There we go. So that's the irony.
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. That's
How
hilarious.
absurd can it get? Yeah.
But it's also like a Freedom Tower on its side. And the plunger is the sub basement. It's just a sub basement down there.
Yeah,
Don't worry.
Totally.
Oh my goodness.
There's no relation to the towers being lost and your freedom being lost.
No, nothing to see there at all. How dare you question history? Try to draw connections between disparate events.
What are you, an artist? Stop trying to draw conclusions.
They actually have
what are you
a
reading for? So I'm
They
not a
have a-
waitress.
watchdog that reports, I think daily or weekly, a 1-page report on disinformation. And I think they send it out to like pharmacists and stuff and tell them like, this is what people are thinking. Be ready. And it's a lot of it is from people taking real data and drawing undesired conclusions and using visual graphics to represent them, which is very powerful. And that it's like a public health crisis. There's nothing false about it. But they
LD,
keep
can we
an
get
eye
a
on it.
t-shirt that says qualified to think? Like,
Nice.
I'm certified to think.
Nice. Oh, I should have worn my I am part of the control group t-shirt.
Oh, I got, what do I got?
That from LD.
I got one of
Awesome.
LD's on support the British.
Nice.
God bless the opium monopoly. That's what it says. There it is. Union Jack. God bless the opium
Perfect.
monopoly.
Perfect.
There you go, LD. Where's your promo for your site? He's like, I'm not on my computer. I can't find the page.
Freedom,
Oh, here he goes.
autonomy.
That freedom,
freedomunitedrevolt.com. freedomunitedrevolt.com.
FreedomUnitedRevolt.com.
freedomunitedrevolt.com. 3 words.com.
Freedom.
All right.
Yeah, I'll try to bring it up here. I'm trying to do 1,000 things at once, and some of these things are breaking.
He
but
is too. He's trying to
Freaking
use my
good.
studio back there. He's like trying to find buttons.
We're all on
Tony's like
Oh,
forgetting
yeah,
the
right,
switch.
right.
situations.
Yeah. Every now and then, it's like you just if it was NASCAR and I'm the driver, all of a sudden I'm the guy in the pit and Tony's driving the car and LD's like,
That's what's
we're all
happening.
just doing jobs that we don't normally do, except I'm doing my job tonight. So just them. Awkward. I'm fine.
us.
I'm comfortable. I'm having a great time.
He's
Everything
enjoying
works
this.
when I push my buttons over here. We're good.
Yeah. So we could put it together, but it's an
What do you think's going to
incredible-
happen in 2022, Monica?
I was thinking they were going to do like a double down on the prolonging the agony, but I feel like at this point they would have to spray a whole new microbe on us. I think this.
I thought
might
that
just-
Omicron was.
Oh yeah, maybe because you don't lose your taste or smell, but I'm starting to think that they let it out and that nature's running its course and it's really kind of impossible to keep people sick constantly. So I think we might be pulling out of it. I think we might be pulling out of the dive.
I'm white pill, but I'm not that naive. They're not going to do that. They're
Well, I
gonna
mean, I
milk-
think that
they're going to try to get
world is
mandates
changing.
before the jig is up. They're going to try to get mandates because mandates will be forever. They'll have control and they can put anything in your body anytime they want in the future with the precedents they're setting now. So I think they're interested in
Sometimes I feel
setting
like
precedents.
they go really far and then they pull back. And the mandates, maybe, but something about it all along felt like it was just a bridge too far, that it was always like a psyop.
That was 2 years ago, lady.
But
Come
we
on,
still don't
like, come
have
on.
the actual mandates, right? Like nobody's at my house holding me down.
I heard
Yeah.
Supreme Court arguments there, so they're getting pretty close to being able to be like, can we do this? Can we enforce
Yeah.
this? Because most of the people who are not pro gene therapy are very intelligent people. I'm not saying that because that's my position. I'm saying it's PhDs, it's a lot of people of color. There's a lot of smart people understanding history and what these people have done over time. And they're the ones who aren't on board. The people who lap up CNN like it's their breakfast cereal, those are the people with problems right now. And they're going to be future customers of that pharma complex for life. And yeah, Trump promoted all this because he did take their lobbying money, because he's like, oh, why not take Pfizer's money? Because there was nothing on his radar that would be like, they'll never do it, right? So
I don't believe in
so
Trump. I think Trump is a complete made up, created person.
Yeah, I agree there, 100%.
Yeah.
I just want to throw this here. Despite Sotomayor's absurd lack of COVID-19 knowledge, U.S. Supreme Court seems skeptical. I just had COVID. That's why my voice is a little bit messed up, but skeptical of the Biden vaccine mandates.
Fauci said I can get COVID from Zoom calls. Is that true?
I haven't read through this. So I was going to go through this later.
Get AIDS from a cereal box. You get COVID from a Zoom call.
Yeah, right. And get AIDS from a damn cereal box.
Well, you might be able to get COVID from a Zoom call, but you also might not necessarily get it from people's face holes. Like, I don't know how it's transmitted. I got it. I'm pretty sure I got it from somebody who was vaccinated, like freshly vaccinated.
I thought it was transmitted by
vaccinated people as well. And that's exactly what happened. And what's interesting is, like, again, this is just about a federal mandate. It doesn't mean the states, like, they're just ruling on a federal mandate, whether or not the federal government is within the purview to mandate the private sector of, I guess, 100 or more employees, which is a totally arbitrary cutoff, by the way, of whether or not they can mandate vaccination in regards to SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. And so it doesn't, at least open the door what state legislatures can still do. That's what concerns me, because there's still a bill, A416, that's in New York that would give, and there's a Washington state one as well that shout out to James Jordan and Liberty Radio.
January 12th, call to action on the Washington thing.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and I have that on the show card as well, but I'll bring that up a little later. But that's scary, because they're kind of dividing and conquering us in between state lines. And obviously the separation of powers within the United States Constitution has done a great job of being able to expose those states, such as like maybe Texas and Florida and some of the Midwestern states that have done very well with seemingly very little government intervention. And yet we can see like New York and Michigan and California and these other states that have done terribly, and yet had the most intervention as far as government hegemony. And it's a terrifying proposition, because one thing, on one level, it's brilliant because it showcases how, in a conspicuous fashion, between different states, we can now take data and take those data and juxtapose it and say, okay, wow, like you can see how different governing policies led to different outcomes. And then we can also compare this to Europe, by the way. Sweden would be a good example here, or Uttar Pradesh, that northern region, and that's almost as the population of America and India as well, which has gone a very different route, very low caseload. And they've seemingly, there's speculation, they've allowed for vitamin D, ivermectin, Z-Pack, these like little helper packages that pretty
early
ubiquitous
treatment
over there. Early treatment, essentially.
It only occurs in India.
Treatment.
We don't have that here. But if we ask our masters real nice, they'll give us an aspirin.
They may do it in two stages. This, I'm not surprised. I would worry about, and I don't think we're safe from them actually making laws that allow it. But I wonder if they are ready to have those laws in place, but not use them this time. So like after World War II, I believe Britain had a law in place that if they decided you were an essential worker, you were not allowed to quit that job. And I don't think they ever used it, but they had it on the books for a long time. And I wonder if that's the real danger here, is that the precedent they can't set the precedent and implement it on a population that doesn't have that kind of, archetype ready. They implement it now in time of crisis. And then they say, see, we're not really using it because you can trust us. And we'd only do it if it was like extreme, but this thing's going away now. So. But yeah.
It's there. But then it's there.
Yeah, but then it's there. So like, I'm not saying that. I'm not naive enough to think that we are returning to any kind of liberty at all. But my white pill is just that I live in LA. Like my white pill is that I can go to the fucking salon. You know, that's what I'm thinking. 2022, Santa might bring me for 2022.
Go to the salon and be unvaccinated, and go to the supermarket and be unvaccinated,
Yeah.
and these sorts of things. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is, not there's
Yeah, it's
certain
war
states, I guess,
mentality. It's fucking
Is
war
there a
mentality. I'm like, I'll do
vaccine passport?
anything. Just stop it.
Is there a
I
vaccine
don't
passport in
think-
California?
No,
Okay, I
no,
didn't
but
think so
people,
either.
you have to show it. You have to show the thing.
You have to show the card. Okay.
If you want to do anything. I don't do
Papers,
anything.
please. Do
I'm
you ever
fit.
ask them to say it in a German accent?
No, but
It's LA. I'm sure there's a lot of character actors out there. who
even
could
if you
try.
make it crack, like people get fucking pissed at you.
The Nazis were like that too.
Yeah,
That's
I
what
got
I'd
an
say.
Uber.
It'd be like
Yeah,
the
and I-
Nazis didn't. Hey, as we were getting on the trains making jokes about the Nazis, they didn't like that either.
Yeah,
To take note
exactly.
history.
The Uber guy was like, he was complaining about the mask or whatever, and I was just like, and these fucking vaccines, and I could tell him thinking like, can I just pull over and get her out of the car? Like she's unvaccinated. It's like, oh my god.
Unclean.
It totally stops transmission. Wink, wink. I mean,
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I
it
know.
stops-
They
absurd.
didn't
actually-
even claim
So absurd.
that.
I
They don't
can't
even
believe
claim
it.
that.
I know it's on the CDC website, so it doesn't stop transmission.
Yeah, and
It
it's in all
stops
the trials.
transmission. It
I
does
read
stop
all the trials.
transmission. It stops
Mhm.
transmission of your fertility to the next generation. I heard
Yeah,
studies
I
on
mean,
that. I heard someone laugh at that. Who said that? Who laughed at the other day? Was it like Dana Bash or Crystal Ball or somebody laughed because they're asked about fertility repercussions, and they laughed like, "Oh yeah, like that's a thing." I think it was somebody at the
it
hospital.
actually is a
recently.
thing because
and then
there's
yeah,
here.
they
I'm gonna
said
show
it-
here. Look,
the
look at-
CDC came out and said like it does change your cycle by a day, but it doesn't matter. It's like, okay, but when I said it changes your cycle by a day, they were just like, you're a fucking nut. Ooh,
Right.
sorry.
Well, there's this here. Vaccinated
cuss
women
on you.
lying
You
about
can say whoever
about
you say whatever you want.
vulgarity. I don't
Look.
cuss or swear, but I do use vulgarity.
She just did.
There.
Come
It
on.
makes me feel better when I cuss and swear. Apparently, more
Yeah, I
honest
was
people
just
cuss
using
and
Speak
swear.
with
according to a
parrhesia.
Princeton study. But this is funny. I mean, not funny, absurd. But
Vaccinated women.
vaccinated women lying about vax status as potential mates consider infertility risk.
Nice.
This comes from, I guess, the COVID World blog, but the New York male tested he and other males encountered females who initially claimed to be unvaccinated, only later to reveal their true vaccinated status. So
Dun, dun,
women are
That's
reportedly
excellent.
sensitive to men's concerns.
So
of
it's
the
like
COVID
disappearing up into its own asshole. Like,
Yeah, pretty much. It's so absurd. Like women are, I have an anecdote in my own life. A very healthy couple, friends of mine. I'm 35, they're 34. They had a perfect first pregnancy, and the second one, the only difference was the jab and stillborn. And so the stillborn rates seem to be exploding. This was such a story that I know this was asked in the Canadian Parliament as far as like what's going on. And there's been a lot of, and you mentioned, I think it was there's a couple studies now. I have one about menstruation on here as well, but there was one out of Denmark I could have sworn had on a couple of weeks ago, saying the same thing. If it wasn't Denmark, it's another European nation that showed that it has real-time changes to a woman's menstrual cycle. They talked about heavy bleeding as well and other issues going along with menstruation. So it's a serious concern. We also know, according to Robert Malone, that the luciferase enzyme, which is this what makes the lightning bug or whatever ass light
exactly.
up. Yeah, they put this in the synthetic nanolipid particle, put this in animals, put this in mice, and they see where does it travel to in the body. Well, it traveled to the reproductive organs, traveled to the eggs, or in this case the gonads. I mean, it could be both the testicles, or
I'm pretty sure that luciferase is an ingredient in the current gene therapy. So can they track that too? And what were their findings?
Well, it's interesting because it's saying the lipid nanoparticle is like so that's essentially collecting in places such as the reproductive organs or the heart, and then it's delivering the payload, which would be this mRNA, which encodes for the spike protein, which is like the howitzer that causes all the damage in the
right.
first
So the
place.
COVID causes that damage too. Like
That's impossible.
the
My
thing.
TV told me it
That's
doesn't
right.
leave the
That's
arm.
right.
You
That's
guys
what
must be
I'm bummed
wrong.
about.
Stop
is
reading
that
books.
I got COVID and I'm like, wow. So because having had it, I feel 100% that it was artificial bioweapon. Definitely.
Oh, me too.
created
I
in the
just had
lab.
it, and it
No
was the
question
strangest
about it.
disease
Oh,
I ever had.
So still, it's still like that? Because I was thinking Omicron.
Mhm.
Omicron might just
Yeah.
be a cold.
No,
if it's still
No, Tony
weird.
probably had Delta though.
So
I
now I,
could have
have
had
that. So
Delta.
now
I
I
could
have
have
that
had
shit
Delta.
in my body. Like I did not escape it. And everybody I know, even the people who didn't get vaxxed and didn't get COVID, are starting to get it. Like it is going to be in everybody.
I got it from my double vaccinated parents.
Me too.
I went over
I
to
got
their
it from
house.
a vaccinated person.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember going over to the house, and like it's a veritable vaccine shedding factory, and because they're coughing and they're wheezing, and I'm coming over the FLCCC protocols. I have all the supplements, the ivermectin, like the whole 9 yards. I'm laying out what to do, and they're coughing and sneezing over me and doing all this stuff. And I took as much prophylactic precaution as I could, but it still wasn't good enough. Of course, incubates.
What
for
made
2
you
days
feel
and
better?
I hit it really intensely with early treatment. I mean, I did a very intense vitamin, mineral, nutraceutical protocol.
It's kind of a kitchen sink type thing.
Yeah, kind of alongside a very high dose of ivermectin. I did a double
You
dose.
did ivermectin?
I did ivermectin.
That would have
yeah.
worked. I did all the supplements and everything, and I only started feeling better when I started addressing the lung issue. I was drinking quinine and lungwort tea. That was the only thing. That's when I started to feel better. Like it was just like little razor blades. But this taste and smell took forever. And I was sick for a long time. Like up until this was a year ago, I got it. And up until October,
wow,
I was starting to think like I was a not well person. Like this was it. Like
you had long COVID.
Yes. And I asked McCullough, actually, I said, is long COVID a thing? And he's like, absolutely. It's not too late.
100%. There are people that share. I run a town hall on Tuesday nights, and they're sharing their experiences. And one of them said, shout out to Phoenix and James. They do Liberty Radio on Monday nights at 7:00. But he's Phoenix in this case. Said to me, it's been 8 months and my taste and smell is still completely just, he's still struggling with that, and it's coming back slowly, but to affect the nervous system in that way, like that's strange.
It's
that's
weird. And
very
McCullough
strange.
It could also be low zinc, because I think that there's some research showing that when COVID hits you, it like
But I was eating all
your
that
zinc.
stuff. Yeah, I was eating all that stuff like crazy. McCullough said the only thing that has that real long tail is Lyme disease, and that too
also came from a lab
bioweapon. Yeah,
bioweapon. Yeah.
So lab 257.
257. I keep saying 251. 257 off. Yeah, right off of Connecticut, right?
Yeah, Lyme, Connecticut.
Lyme, Connecticut. Oh, these people! Crazy world, huh?
But we're crazy. That's
they would never weaponize
record,
insects.
By the way, the Lyme thing.
Let me read you the DARPA documents on weaponizing insects from Whitney Webb. No, they would.
They had, it's part of Laboratory 251, if I remember correctly. They had a tick, like part of the animals they were working in, the insects were ticks, which is interesting.
They're going to drop on Cuba. They're going to mess with Castro.
257. Sorry.
Wow.
Yeah. But yeah, those ticks were actually part of Lab 257 and what they were studying there. And then all of a sudden, there's an outbreak. Wow, what a coincidence.
Yeah, and I never believed like what you guys were talking about at the beginning of the show, what Sharon Lerner was talking about. Like, I don't believe in unintended consequences. I don't believe in government incompetence. Like that didn't accidentally escape from a lab the same day that they did a scenario on it in New York, an event 201. Like it's definitely not like, that's the problem with the Intercept is like, they allow you to think of that. They act like they're telling you everything, and they're really holding back. It's intentional. This is proof of a conspiracy
to keep people guessing, to fill in those blanks. Do you remember Peter Power of Visor Consultants? Do you know that name? All right, World Trade Center. No, sorry, not World Trade Center 7/7 bombing in London. A subway, a bus, and some other incident, right? Peter Power, and the clip is out there, worked for a place called Visor, VISOR Consultants. And they happened to give this guy airtime that morning because he was present, right? And what he said was something like this. We were on the scene conducting an exercise, and then the actual thing that we were practicing for happened at the places where we were practicing. So we went from slow time to quick time thinking and jumped into action. And he just totally let the whole cat out of the bag, and it was gone. It was not going back in the bag. And then people started to be like, what else is going on that these people run off? Oh, 9/11 had 14 to 20 operations going that morning with
Boston
hijackings,
Marathon bombing,
all those things.
Yeah, Boston Marathon. Yeah.
And my question is like, how'd the Arabs do that? Or how did the brothers from the Boston bombing, what was their
the Tsarnaevs?
Okay. When I had up this thought in the history blueprint earlier, I almost said it, but I'm like, I don't have context to show you. But let me just go back a couple screens because there was a foundation involved with the Tsarnaevs.
Jamestown.
Henry Jackson Society.
Oh,
right here.
I did a lot of work on the Tsarnaevs, and I don't remember.
Yeah, the Henry Jackson Society had who was the guy that was involved with the not Pearl? There's another guy. Dearlove? No, Woolsey. No, maybe it was Dearlove. It was one of these guys. These are both dirty birds.
Yeah, I
But
was gonna say Woolsey.
Dearlove is former MI6 director. So when like people from Henry Jackson Society had direct contact with the Boston bombers, this might be one of the videos that I was studying on it. Anyway, they're too close. They're too close to the actual.
The uncle. The uncle was married.
Ruslan, Uncle Ruslan.
Yeah, he was married to the daughter of Graham Fuller. His Graham Fuller was the CIA chief of Kabul, Afghanistan, and his daughter Samantha Fuller Tsarnaev was where Ruslan Sarny lived when he worked for USAID, doing the exact stuff that Tamerlan was doing in Chechnya, I think maybe.
Yeah. Because they had gone in and out.
They were just outed and they were gotten rid of. I mean, that's just what that was. They were,
and then we watched them hunt the guys.
Kid though, who's definitely dead. I called that. I said, you'll never see a picture of that kid again because he died immediately. Was in school to become a dentist. I mean, that was
well. And the backpack pictures didn't match. There was a whole bunch of things.
I did so much to the point where
about that whole thing.
Ibrahim Todashev, who was the guy in Florida who got shot like 6 times to the body and once to the crown of the head. His wife called me from Russia, and I did an interview with her. Renee something. And I even asked her, I was like, so the Tsarnaev, like when that kid, Jahar Tsarnaev went to court, like that wasn't really him, right? And she's like, no, I think it was him. So I don't know, but that's the point at which I mean, and a couple of times I said stuff that was reflected. This was weird. Like, so I would say that kind of thing. And I'd say, you'll never see a picture of him again. And then there'd be a picture of him come out a few days later. So there's only 2 times I think I was ever like listened to when I was on WSB, and that was one of them. And
they're like, we need to get an updated picture out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. And then I started feeling bad that I ever say stuff like that. But I mean, no, I was rarely listened to, but they must just have people listen to everything all the time.
They do. And there's a lot of those incidents in American history that people kind of just overlook or forget about. But once you start looking into them, they start adding up. Like if you've ever done work into looking Oklahoma City bombing, what was that about? Or what was Waco about? You ever watch Waco Rules of Engagement and watch the FLIR footage of them watching the people inside on infrared, right? Forward looking infrared, and they can see, and they got the tanks and they're,
And Biden said they lit themselves on fire.
Yeah.
And the OKC, that Noble Lie was a good documentary on that.
Yeah. Terrence Yakey was the cop who committed suicide, and he was like
there was a cop like that in Charlie Hebdo too.
Yeah.
Went to his office to write up what he had found out and decided to shoot himself in the head at his desk.
Yeah, well, Gary Webb, who was talking about cracking the CIA, and he shot himself
2 shots in the head.
I went into
Michael Hastings. Let's not forget about him.
Where's the book? True Lies. The author of this book, Anthony LePay. I went to see him one time because he wrote this book called True Lies. It's all about 9/11 and Bush and Flight 93 and these types of things, right? So I went and talked to him, and he was friends with Gary Webb, and he told me Gary Webb shot himself twice.
Wow.
And I shouldn't see any problem with that, and I shouldn't ask people questions about that. And then he took a call from a guy named Saul in Israel while we were there. And so while I have a recording of that meeting, I feel like I was in a room that was bugged, and they also had a recording of the meeting as well. And his mom was a famous communist kind of agitator. So there are people out there among us who put some stuff out, but they come from a long history of collectivism and overthrow and chaos, and not the good type of anarchy.
Did you ever hear Gaddafi's son? This is also a callback to earlier in the show. Gaddafi's son called Dennis Kucinich. Did you ever hear the leaked tape of Kucinich Yeah. So
No.
Gaddafi's son called Dennis Kucinich. And another thing that you might not have heard
That's
was a lot of leaked
interesting.
stuff about Gaddafi saying, look, I will completely resign. I will step down. Just find somebody to replace me because this place will descend into chaos. And Hillary wouldn't even take his call, Gaddafi's call. She was hell bent on
That I
chaos.
do remember a little
Yeah.
bit. Yeah.
But
that
the
one, yeah.
son called Kucinich and said, this is all lies. I know America must know that we're not terrorists. Those are terrorists from other countries. They're cutting people's heads off. This is insane. And what was not only interesting was that call, but what was really interesting to me is that Kucinich, they asked Kucinich, because it was from Kucinich's end that it was being recorded. And they asked him, like, did you record your calls? He said, I don't know who made that recording.
That is fascinating. I mean, the throwback to what you're saying here, and this is from March 11th, 2011. This is the original research community that Richard Grove and his wife had set up together called Tragedy and Hope.
I remember that.
Yeah, I'm old school, right? This old, the NING, the Ning platform, very, very clunky, but you know, we made do with it. And
Yeah, it looks good.
this is episode
works.
208 of Media Monarchy.
Wow.
And he goes, world cheers as CIA plunges
Wow.
Libya into chaos. You know, before the chaos erupted, Libya had a lower incarceration rate than the Czech
Yeah.
Republic. They ranked 61st. Libya had the lowest infant mortality rate of all of Africa. Libya had the highest life expectancy of all of Africa, so forth. And so Libya had the highest GDP and purchasing power. The government took care to ensure blah, blah, blah. Libya had the highest human development index. That's what I was trying to allude to earlier with the metrics that the I want to say the IMF or WHO uses, and probably the IMF in this case, to rank, or maybe the economists, so forth and so on. Libya, power percentage of people live below the poverty line, blah, blah, lower percentage of people live below the poverty. A lot of these links now are broken because they're 10 years old.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. So it's
Here's
interesting when you went
Gaddafi's-
through this, it's just like it's just line after line. This is all the stuff that James Evan Plato, you know, detailed on his 208 of Media Monarchy. And you could sort of, what was interesting going back through is you can see all the sort of research that we're doing. A lot of these links are now broken, YouTube links.
Yes, I used to do that too. And not only did
Yep.
I get taken down from WordPress, but the even when I tracked down some of those old resources, they're gone. For Boston Marathon bombing, I uploaded a lot of it to my computer. It's probably not there anymore, but there were a lot of eyewitness reports of what really happened. And
did you know Leanna Wen was one of the individuals interviewed? And if Leanna Wen's like the CNN correspondent for COVID now, but she was also one of the ones interviewed on the Boston bombing.
Oh yes,
like right
I
when it
saw
happened.
her.
It was
Yes,
pretty-
yes.
Now, wait a second. She works for Planned Parenthood. Why is she qualified to talk on the Boston bombing? That's interesting.
Yeah,
But
they're very
before we get
strange,
away
right?
from his son, I wanted to point out Muammar Gaddafi's son, Saif.
Yep.
Okay.
Al-Islam.
He studied at London School of Economics,
Right, with the Rothschilds.
under Rhodes Scholar Joseph Nye, and the Rothschilds are the primary financial kind of.
They
I know. I think he was
LSE
buddies
and
with
the-
the Rothschilds. He was good friends with the Rothschilds. I believe.
and LSE, London School of Economics, and the Economist are Rothschild concoctions.
Yeah.
So LSE over here criticized Gaddafi for his links, or the regime in India or in Libya, right? So LSE criticized for links with Gaddafi regime. So there's BBC stories saying Gaddafi has connections with this group, right? And then the Monitor group out of Boston also consulted on these types of things that precipitated into the Benghazi attack on September 11th, 2012. Where do I know that date from? September 11th. Is that the 1973 operation? Was it not Ajax? What's the one where they killed?
Ajax was the
Allende.
Shah. Was when they put the Shah
Right.
in.
That was 1953. Which is the
Pinochet-
one?
Allende. What was the name of
Yeah.
that?
I forget. I'm getting old.
Was that Camelot?
All right. Anyway, so I guess this
That's not
dates this date in Libya.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's interesting because the people that killed his dad, he's still getting educated and works for them, apparently.
I could pick this brain forever, and I might have to, but I'm going to have to hop because I have to do my own show first thing in the morning. And but how do I get that brain?
I can give you a link. You can have access. Like it's just I can give you a web door to it, and you can get in and do a search for basically anything that's in there on these topics.
Am I going to be able to
Yeah.
intuit how to use it?
You click, point and click.
It's parent-child
I can click.
cousin relationships, and you'll
It's point and
see the
shoot.
cousin.
Point and shoot.
Yeah, it's very, very easy. Yeah.
Wow.
Here's the web thought. I'll drop it in Discord, and they maybe
Where
LD
do
can
you
send
find
it
the
to you.
time to do all this, Richard?
Sunday
And
nights, 9
everybody,
p.m.
Tony. Yeah.
Well, honestly,
LD.
Rich spent. I mean, when I met him, let me put myself on. I'm doing too many things all at once. My brain's all scattered. When I met them, and I lived with them for a little bit, sort of off and on, Rich had spent a good many years after being a whistleblower himself and going down the rabbit hole and trying to figure out. I mean, I walked into a library that you see all the little notes he has in there and the highlights, and he was very pedantic and diligent and his and granular and
A little bit like Rain Man.
Yeah, he
Nice.
really was. It was absurd, and it was to a level, but that's what's needed. And
It's
I remember
time,
his-
but you
yeah,
have to
it's
really
time.
spend the time, which is
And
why
they
you kind of
spent-
have to make a living of it because you can't do it as a side gig.
and it was hard to make a living. That's the thing. They spent well over a decade
Yeah.
doing this, whereas living sort of on a very limited means.
Yeah.
And it was that's what it took, though. I remember his wife once
Yeah,
saying,
that's
like,
what it
this
takes.
is what it takes to understand the world you live in. And she was panning to all the books and all the time. And I know exactly what we went through. It was very difficult, emotionally tiring, physically tiring, compromising to their ability to just enjoy some of the basic.
Yes.
Well, it just almost seems like there should be a group of people who are well funded that are supposed to take care of these things, and it shouldn't fall to a former whistleblower who happens to be like, okay, I got time and aptitude to solve this problem.
And
Let's do
myself,
it.
a dude who
Right.
just tripped on
Right.
mushrooms and was like a little
Yeah.
too concerned about, I gained some conscientiousness from it. And so it shouldn't fall on dudes like us or other individuals, James Corbett, James Evan Plot. I mean, there's been so many. Now there's the Jay Dyers. I mean, there's so many people we could point to. Alex Jones is one of the sort of innovator, and I guess,
Yeah.
do that whole thing. But
He had some
it's-
great stuff. Ben Livingston, Charlotte Iserbite.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah. Sort of. Yeah. There's so many of them.
He's
We
the
There's
best.
stand on the
John Taylor
shoulders of
Gatto.
giants.
Yeah, John Taylor Gatto,
Yeah.
obviously, which
Yeah.
Rich could really see the value in that at a time where I didn't even know
John
who
Taylor
the man
Gatto.
was. So.
That's when I became a fan of Rich.
But thank you for joining us.
Yeah,
guys.
it's
An
been
incredible
super
conversation.
fun. Yeah, absolutely, really, really enjoyable. And
We'll have to do this again sometime.
yeah, I don't know how you guys do 6 hours straight. That's crazy. You must be a clean liver. So let's have that kind of energy. Wow, it was super fun, guys. I'm gonna say goodbye, but next time it's my turn. See you on my show.
Thank you so much, Monica. Have a
Thanks,
wonderful
guys.
evening.
Love you guys. Bye,
Say hey to
Tony. Bye,
Binkley for
LD.
us.
Sure will.
All right.
Take care.
peace.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
If you haven't heard about our Grand Theft World community membership, here are a few of the things you've been missing. A mobile app where you can access replays of the Grand Theft World podcast and show notes. Access to the Grand Theft World community on Discord, where we crowdsource news and resources, and you can contribute to the show. The opportunity to participate in the Grand Theft World bi-weekly town hall. Exclusive content from Richard Grove, including behind-the-scenes footage and future access to unpublished material. 93 episodes of the Peace Revolution podcast, and the Grand Theft World newsletter delivered straight to your inbox each week. If you want to stay ahead of the great game, visit us at grandtheftworld.com, click or tap the button in the top right-hand corner, and join a vibrant community of researchers blazing a new path to truth. We'll see you there.